On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers in our hometown of Green Bay. We are the official podcast of the Lot 1 tailgate party, which is at Lambeau Field every home game. This is episode 96, created December 26th, 2024. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota. And Neil, he's on the road this week in the Lone Star State, the great state of Texas. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
In Texas, I'm going to drink beers from Texas. I like the Real Ale Brewing Company, and I'm having their Proto New World Pilsner.
Good evening, gentlemen. Tonight, I'm having Bailey's Irish Cream on the rocks.
And gentlemen, I got a gift for Christmas. I got a new blender. That means I had to make an ice cream drink. I've got a grasshopper. All right. You can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat. And just the audio is available on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. Really, this week, we're just going to look at the Monday Night Football game in Green Bay against the Saints and Week 17 at Minnesota. But that final score in Green Bay, 34-0. Surprisingly, the first and only shutout of this 2024 NFL season. And the Green Bay Packers made short work of the New Orleans Saints, a depleted squad, nonetheless, that came into Green Bay.
Are we allowed to complain about this game? I mean, is this just one where we're going to be happy all day?
Based on my text, I think so.
Or after the Detroit game?
Yes, I'm doing much better after the Detroit game. Yes, it was a comfortable, non-stressful, enjoyable football game to watch. And probably even better to be at, Neil.
It was, of course, a fabulous day at Lambeau Field. You cannot have a better game when the offense does everything right and the defense does everything right the first 6 drives of the game. And it was reduced to, at the end of the game, that we were looking forward to the Packers. Can the Packers finish over 400 yards of offense, and can they keep the Saints under 200 yards of defense? And that was essentially what I was cheering for at the end of the game, other than maybe complaining about people doing the wave, which I was also not so happy with, like Matt LaFleur.
They were bored, Neil. They were bored.
It was 24-0 in the fourth
like
quarter
bored,
when the wave
though.
came out. But yes,
Was good.
I mean, that's the thing about Thursday night games, Sunday night games, and Monday night games is you have a younger crowd. You have less experienced Packers fans. There is a lot more lubrication that's going on in the stands for those night games. It makes for a fun atmosphere. And if you're going to have the fun atmosphere, you're going to have to accept that there may be some less than perfect reactions among the fans in the crowd. And you know what? That's perfectly fine, especially when you win 34-0.
The other thing that was great about that game, Neil, is kind of how the weather changed during the day. Interesting day in Green Bay, starting around 11 a.m. or so, this snowfall, this kind of, the big water-laden snowflakes were coming down, kind of like not a heavy snowfall, though, but just a steady. And it was one of those things where the temperature is like right around 32, 34 degrees, so there's not a lot of accumulation. There's some melting. It was kind of like just a wet snow, right? And I was hoping that this would continue and it would drive down the ticket prices. Unfortunately, that all stopped at like 4:00. Our friend Steve, who was contemplating whether he was going to sell his tickets, he texts me at 4:00. He says, "John, is it snowing or is it raining?" And I said, "Well, at the moment, neither." And literally from that moment on, the secondary market ticket prices started to nudge back up because that law of supply and demand comes into play, and the weather had lost its effect on that law of supply and demand.
So can we talk about the game now a little bit more? Because yes, the pregame was great and we'll talk more about that later, but it was just one of those games where like everything was working right for so long in that game. And let's just look at the first half numbers. Yards, 222 for the Packers, 81 for the Saints in the entire first half as the Packers took a 21-0 lead. The number that I really liked as far as the game is concerned, the Packers beat the Saints in yards all 4 quarters.
They did more than beat them. They just destroyed them. And you're right. So what we were looking for was like the shutout. Can they get over 400 yards? Can they hold them under 200 yards? Everything statistically, you just was perfect. They were 4 for 4 in the red zone, 3 for 3 in the first half. Their penalties were down. And shout out to Brandon McManus, that 55-yard field goal in December in Lambeau. That was shocking. And that thing, it was basically a no doubter. It wasn't snuck in. It wasn't, just barely cry. I was pretty shocked about that. That you just do not see that in December. So other than some goofy penalties, which I would argue were phantom penalties, fortunately, it didn't affect the outcome of the game at all. But there was very, very little to complain about. It was just so complete and just such a domination.
In addition to those great numbers that you put up, Neil, let's also note no interceptions thrown, no fumbles lost, no sacks given up. This is a gold standard game when you look at statistics. This is one of those that's going to be in the record book for a long time that you're going to look at like, holy cow, how did Green Bay dominate this game? Again, the thing to remember is New Orleans really depleted. They literally had no star players this week.
Oh, come on, John. We don't need that sort of negativity here. The Packers were dominant, and just
still,
enjoy the dominance.
I mean, it's still an NFL game, and it was the first shutout of the year. So none of these are a gimme. It ended up being, let's go for the shutout and the win being definitive. And I have nothing really more to say. It was just fantastic to watch. And the Go Pack Go chants and the amount of exposure, again, that Lambeau Field gets in December and the national praise that it continues to get, the story writes itself. And thankfully, we finally got a complete story.
I want to focus on one drive, though, in particular, which is the Packers' second drive, where we stopped New Orleans. We got the ball at our own 4 and went 96 yards on 17 plays. And it included 2 fourth-down conversions along the way, finishing with the Jacobs touchdown. But that was a drive that was just pure beauty as far as all of the parts going together. It was something where it wasn't a drive where it was the home run plays that were doing it. It was a complete drive where the Packers just moved the ball relentlessly down the field. And it was so enjoyable to watch that.
Oh, one other thing, Neil, I thought of in all these great numbers we keep putting out there. This is the 5th game in a row that the Packers offense has scored more than 30 points in a game. That's some huge numbers as well. This is an offense that, we've said, can they put together 4 complete quarters? And when you score that many points, if they, there was that point of sleepwalking in the third quarter, I'll forgive it, right? When you win by that much.
The number of plays that were run, that was key. The Packers ran 69 plays.
Nice.
4 for 4 in the red zone. But here's the thing. They did kind of both. They, as Neil said, they matriculated the ball down the field, but it wasn't 2-3 yards at a time. And occasionally it was. They had 30 passes, 39 runs. So really balanced, but they kept chunk plays in there too. For example, for Green Bay rushing, Josh Jacobs, he also had 69 yards rushing.
Nice.
His long was 20, but then you had Emmanuel Wilson, 17 yards. Christian Watson had a 14-yard run. Bo Milton, they were doing the Jeff sweeps to some degree of success. But then the passing game, it wasn't perfect, but when it was on, Jaden Reed, 3 receptions, 76 yards. Tucker Kraft, his long was 33 for 63. Josh Jacobs, 4 catches for 38 yards. His long was 13. Romeo Doubs had a couple catches. Dontavian Wicks. Everybody contributed and had big plays as well.
Jeff, there were 9 different ball carriers. Not all of them had positive yards, but 9 different ball carriers. That's a huge number. And 10 different receivers targeted. 3 of them didn't have a catch, but 10 targeted. Like you said, everybody got a chance to play in this one. It was like Little League, right? Everybody gets a chance to play.
Yeah, except they were successful, unlike Little League. And going back to those jet sweeps, though, one of the things that the Packers establish here is that it's not just going to be Reed doing that. It's that any wide receiver is essentially in play for moving that ball downfield. And there was a lot of deception that was going on that was allowing all of those big running plays to take place. And just seeing the greater diversity in play calling was one of the things that was really enjoyable from a strategic perspective.
Well, the thing that made it more enjoyable was that most of it worked. These were very successful. Now, again, was it the team that they were playing against?
Jeff, stop the negativity.
They were executing better? No. I'm just saying because damn near everything worked. That's why they had over 400 yards because they were efficient. Things just worked. Everything seemed to work. The only, when Watson got hurt on his jet sweep, that was fluky though, because the guy landed on his knee. Other than that, wow. Not giving up any sacks, that was huge as well.
Yeah, the only negative that I would say as far as the game is concerned, again, this is very much in the realm of nitpicking, is that after Jordan Love threw for 127 yards in the first half, he was 1 of 4 for 4 yards in the third quarter. Our third quarter offense wasn't perfect in the passing game, but again, that's something that essentially became erased in the fourth quarter, both by Love and by Malik Willis. And the other thing, going to statistics, now let's maybe look at the defense, is that you thought, well, when you get to the end of the game, it's going to be garbage time. And certainly New Orleans kept trying longer than I thought they were going to try. But in that fourth quarter, Rattler was 6 of 15 for only 44 yards on 15 attempts in the fourth quarter. It didn't matter who was in there. It didn't matter what the game situation was. The Packers kept playing, and that's an attitude that you love to see.
And they wanted the shutout. I think it just seemed like that was something that they were not going to just relax and just sort of, the prevent defense. In this case, it wouldn't have prevented a win, but you're right. So, but Edgerrin Cooper, again, huge game. 10 tackles, 8 solo tackles, a tackle for loss. Devontae Wyatt had 2 tackles for loss, a sack. Keyshawn Nixon had the strip sack. Brenton Cox, that was another one. He only had 2 tackles, but he had a sack and a tackle for loss. So
and 2 quarterback hits as well.
Yeah. This was a defense that just seemed more interested. Again, I don't know if it was just because they were having such success. I mean, because they only had 2 takeaways and 3 sacks. I mean, which are solid, but I mean, they were playing like they just were much more vested. They wanted this shutout and therefore, kind of had an extra gear or something than we're used to seeing.
I'll throw my conspiracy theory out there. Jeff, it's because Hafley is giving them a game plan that is fun and exciting. And that's what we saw here this week and the week before. It was that Detroit game where they had the vanilla game plan and they didn't look interested.
John, I'm sorry. If you're going to put that forth, you've actually got to provide data. I'm a scientist. You got to provide data. I see no data for your conspiracy theory.
It's not data.
You're just listening to RFK Jr.
You're equating vanilla with not trying. No, it's not a data as far as stats goes. It's the way the look is. When they're just out there on a plain defense and they're not doing anything, that's what I was talking about, that Detroit game. Now, they've got this game.
John.
This was a game where it certainly didn't against New Orleans. And I don't think it's going to in the last 2 weeks either. I think this defense is starting to roll with these things that Jeff Hafley has been trying to get in there, increasing these pressures, increasing these blitzes. You throw the Nixon sack in there. That's something that we haven't seen in a couple of weeks. So yes, you're right, Jeff. Things are changing for this defense. It is becoming more interesting for them because all of those pieces of the puzzle are coming together. They keep building on what they've learned in past weeks, and now they're going to start putting different looks together that are going to make this defense strong.
The other thing you saw in the stat lines, though, is that every single one of those front 4 players had some sort of negative play, whether it was a tackle for loss, whether it was a quarterback hit, whether it was a sack. There were negative plays all the way across that front 4, and not just the starting 4, but essentially that entire front 10 rotation that they've got there. They are really starting to play together, and they are starting to play really effective football. 2 other statistics: Rattler's overall numbers: 15 of 30, 153 yards, 3 sacks. So only 129 net yards passing on 33 passes, a 19.3 QBR. And then for the running of the Saints, if you exclude Rattler's run and only focus on their running backs, 15 rushes for 39 yards by their running backs, 2.6 yards per attempt for their running backs. You figure they've got a backup quarterback in. They should be trying to pound the ball on the ground. Well, guess what? They tried, and they didn't do jack shit pounding the ball on the ground.
And I would argue that the Packers defensive line would have probably had double-digit sacks. You go ahead and watch that game again. The edge rushers were just getting held every single play. And it was starting to piss me off. And it was like, okay, I can let this go. But just if you watch it, it was pretty bad. So the fact that they stuck with it, they didn't whine, they didn't keep throwing up their hands. So they just stuck with it, and good things happened.
The other thing that we've been dealing with the D-backs in the passing game is the number of our top D-backs who've been out. So McKinney, thankfully, has played essentially throughout. But Jair has missed the majority of the season. We've missed Williams and Bullard for a number of recent games. Well, guess what? Eric Stokes is starting to find his own as well, which is something that you figured it might take a while after an injury. And so he was targeted 3 times on 29 pass attempts, 1 reception for 4 yards. In Eric Stokes' last 5 games, Eric Stokes has had 14 passes in his direction, only 6 completions on those 14 attempts with 1 touchdown, 22 yards in the last 5 games targeting Eric Stokes, 58.6 quarterback rating throwing to Stokes. Stokes is finding a different gear that we were not seeing in the first half of the season.
I was thinking he was going to get benched or something was going to happen, and I don't know what it was, but it's like he's a completely different player out there and valuable now. This defensive backfield is really working together. So we're seeing when the defensive line gets the pressure, these guys are back. They're just looking for the interceptions, looking for the turnover. The run defense, they're making the tackles also. This was really another good game where sure tackles were being made. And then on the flip side, the Packers offense and one guy named Josh Jacobs just running over a motherfucker.
Just run him run right into his face. Don't even try to juke, right?
Exactly. That's whether it's Kraft, whether it's Jacobs, it doesn't matter. They're not, tiptoeing out of bounds. They're looking to run somebody
make it hurt
and dish it out.
Yeah.
Which is awesome to watch.
In addition to the defensive backfield, Jeff, a lot of guys are looking great. Carrington Valentine, I think, is coming out of that sophomore slump. Zane Anderson, last 4 games, Xavier McKinney, 0 interceptions. Zane Anderson, he's got 1. He got a pick and a nice run back with it as well. So Anderson, this is a guy that's been a special teams player, and he's needed to come out there with injuries to Bullard and Williams, and he's making the most of it. He's making the most of it and looking good.
It was his first start, and by the way, he ends up being the top-rated D-back by PFF grades. That's taking advantage of your opportunities.
It was nice to see Matt LaFleur after the game, recognize him as well. But you know what? On his interception, it was a great interception, but the D-back, either one of them could have had the interception. I mean, he was just blanketed, and it was like this all night. They couldn't throw downfield, even the short stuff. They had it locked down and shut down. And let's hope this continues because tell you what, the Vikings, their receivers are a wee bit better than those New Orleans receivers.
One other quick question for you guys, and this, Jeff, goes to our special teams players. Because of the way my night went out, I didn't get to see this part, but it's near the end of the first half, inside the 2-minute warning. Packers punt, and it's Daniel Whelan's punt, that 60-yard kick that he had. Now, I listened to it on the radio, and I can tell you that Wayne Larrivee was absolutely gushing about this punt and the height that it had. From the press box, he said it went up over the lights. They then went to John Kuhn on the sideline for a report on that punt as well. And he was talking about, even from the ground, how incredible it was. So I'll ask you, Jeff, how did it look on TV? And Neil, from your seats, could you tell this was a big punt?
No, sorry. It didn't seem like it was that special of a punt. I mean, it was 60 yards. He only punted twice, and his other one was not a great one. So it was nice to see that this raised his average for the evening. But I guess for me on TV, it wasn't anything super special. Neil, what was your perspective?
So this punt was coming right towards me. And what was interesting about the punt, I was actually annoyed with the Packers special teams because the Saints player who was catching the punt executed an absolutely glorious fake on the Packers, acting as if he caught the ball and then it was going, and it had the entire Packers special teams completely faked out as the ball just rolls out of the end zone. And it was the beauty of actually the Saints fake that was most impressive to me because, it went 15 yards behind where the Saints player was and pretended that he caught the ball.
John, maybe everybody lost it in the lights then. It was that booming of a punt.
The other thing about the game is that Luke Musgrave finally appeared from his injuries. And every time he was on the field, we were all watching what Luke Musgrave was doing and just sort of seeing, is he going to get the ball? Is he going to get a reception? How are they going to integrate him in the game? He only played 8 plays in the end, but it was nice to see Luke Musgrave out there again.
Yes. And hopefully this is, as we go week to week to week, he gets more reps and it's some catches, and then sort of the 2-headed tight end monster hopefully we can see that again soon.
And it was a great night for Monday Night Football in Green Bay. Neil, we didn't even talk about this that much yet. Every day in Green Bay is a great day, right? So we had not only a great day tailgating, but it was a good weekend all the way around. Starting out Friday night, we got to hang out together, and just terrific weather for December. Mentioned the weather earlier and how it affected the ticket prices, but tailgating was spectacular. And the amazing thing about tailgating, I saw one Saints fan tailgating. Neil, how many did you see?
I saw two Saints fans tailgating. I saw one Saints fan at the game. There was nobody from the opposing team who was there, which, I don't think that's necessarily good inherently, but it was remarkable. I've never seen so few opposing fans at a Packers game before. And it was a fun day, though, despite the fact, again, New Orleans fans are fun fans to have join us. And it was just a fun day, I think, because the snow actually stopped. I was really concerned about going into the game sopping wet from that wet snow, and it stopped basically once everybody started getting into the full swing of the festivities. And yeah, it was a fun day at Lambeau. It was very warm. It ended up around 30 degrees, but there was no wind whatsoever. So it was a very warm game. People were more concerned about shedding layers than adding layers. And I didn't wear my gloves the entire game. And I bought a hat and I really didn't even need that. It was a lovely, lovely day of football in every way.
The other thing to note, at the tailgate party, we were able to spread the word that Scott Schwartz has been nominated for the Packer Hall of Fame. So we started telling people about that. We'll spend some more time about that next week. We'll get it out on social media. Voting for that again starts on January 1st. We'll get you more information on how to vote for our friend Scott, who runs the Lot 1 tailgate party. But a great day in Green Bay. And as we look ahead to week 17, the Green Bay Packers will be traveling to Minnesota to face the Vikings. A few things to make note of here. First of all, this game got flexed to the 3:25 kickoff. It is the Fox Flex National game, the other one on CBS. So you should be able to get the Packer game regardless of where you are. The other thing is the Packers are in the playoffs. We know that. They've been hovering in that number 6 seed. Here's where it gets fun. For Green Bay to have a chance to move up to that number 5 seed, here's what has to happen. Green Bay has to win at Minnesota this week and then win at Chicago in week 18. That in conjunction with obviously Minnesota losing to Green Bay and then losing to Detroit in week 18. That gives Green Bay and Minnesota 13-4 records, matching records. Their division and conference records are the same. And if I'm understanding the tiebreaker correctly, it comes down to one common opponent, and that is the Los Angeles Rams. The Packers beat the Rams beat the Vikings. That gives Green Bay the tiebreaker and the number 5 seed. The road is there. The lights are on. It's time to drive it home.
And this is also important to avoid going in the other direction, because if the Packers lose to Minnesota and beat the Bears and the Washington Commanders win their last 2 games, the Packers would end up being the 7 seed on the basis of conference record. And so the Packers versus Minnesota could be a determination of the 5 seed versus the 7 seed. Obviously, nobody wants to be the 7 seed this year in the NFC.
And it makes sense why this game got moved to the national broadcast right in the late kickoff. So that's great. When we look at week 18, right now, there's only really 2 compelling matchups. One is that aforementioned Minnesota at Detroit game. The other one is the Seahawks and the Rams that could decide the NFC West, if anybody really cares about that. So it just depends on what happens this week with the Green Bay and the Minnesota game to see where things are going to shake up for week 18. And those games haven't even been announced yet.
So looking ahead to that actual game, this is a game that if you look just purely on the records, you say, wow, the Vikings are 2 games better than the Packers. The Vikings are clearly the better team. The Packers are going to have to struggle and put together a really great game plan to have a chance in Minnesota. But if you actually look at the numbers, whether it's the standard types of numbers or the advanced statistics, the Packers have an advantage in this game. Going by DVOA, the Packers are 3rd overall in the NFL now in DVOA versus 6th for Minnesota. 3rd in offense in DVOA on the season. Minnesota's 14th in offense on the season in DVOA. Defense 6th for Green Bay versus 3 for Minnesota. Special teams 11 for Green Bay. We're now in the top 3rd versus 20 for Minnesota. And if you go by weighted DVOA, which weights the more recent games compared to the earlier games in the season, the Packers are now 2nd in the NFL in weighted DVOA in this season. 8th for the Vikings. And specifically looking at DVOA only for weeks 11 through 16, the Packers are first in the NFL in DVOA over the last 6 weeks. Vikings 8th. Our offense, third in the NFL last 6 weeks. Defense, second in the NFL last 6 weeks. And our special teams are second in the NFL over the last 6 weeks by DVOA. Even the asshats are contributing.
Finally.
This is a team that, is clicking on all cylinders and is peaking at the right time. This is the time to start hitting all those numbers, increasing from everything that they did all season. And the last 2 weeks of the season going into the playoffs will be very exciting for this team.
Neil, I think one of the differentiators in this Packers-Vikings game is going to come down to the offensive line. So the Packers this year have been extremely good with limiting sacks. Jordan Love has only been sacked 11 times. Malik Willis has only been sacked 5 times. That's a total of 16. That's second in the league. Vikings, on the other hand, they've had some struggles on the offensive line, and they've surrendered 46 total sacks, which is 24th in the NFL. So if what we saw for the Packers defensive line against New Orleans, if we can get that kind of pressure again, I think Sam Darnold's going to have a really, really long day. Yes, they have great receivers, but if he's not upright to throw the ball to them, it's not going to matter.
The other thing is that advanced statistics also support this. And just by PFF grades, the Vikings are 26th in pass blocking efficiency. Sam Darnold is 23rd in the NFL in pressure to sack ratio. That is, you get pressure on him, there's a pretty good chance he's going to be sacked. And although Sam Darnold has had a very good year by Sam Darnold standards, he's gotten a little bit lucky as well. And so specifically, he is 23rd in the NFL in turnover-worthy play percentage. That is, he's gotten lucky in not having as many interceptions as he should have had this year. So you have that opportunity, convert on those interceptions, and he's given teams plenty of opportunities. They have not converted as much as they've needed to, but he's going to give the Packers those chances.
And with our defensive backs play stepping up as well. Again, they're having more fun. They just look better. There no longer seems to be a weakness back there, because at the beginning of the year, Stokes was a step behind. He was getting torched. And his last, handful of games, he's been really good. And the young players are stepping up. I think there's still it's up in the air if Jair Alexander plays. It's kind of looking maybe not. But I think, again, these younger players and especially the safety play, they're really coming up huge. And I'm hoping it's going to be a really long day for those Vikings receivers.
Yeah, the big difference, though, is that Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison are a lot better than some of those receivers we've been playing. So it's going to be a major test for those defensive backs, especially if Jair is not going to play, which, again, seems to be the case.
Jeff, I think there's also a much different feel in Minnesota for this game than there was last year. Remember last year we talked about the New Year's Eve game in Minnesota, and that's a game that Green Bay just shocked the Vikings and quieted that stadium. I feel like the Vikings fans are very full of themselves, very much believing their own press this year. They want to dominate this game and they want to beat Green Bay, and they want to do it at a premium price. You cannot, on the secondary market, you cannot get in that building on Sunday for less than $400 right now.
Wow.
It's amazing how the ticket prices have shot up for this game. And primarily, I think it's the Vikings fans looking to get that home victory against Green Bay.
Yes. However, with the Packers being the road team this year, it almost works in their favor. The two teams have split the season series in each of the last 4 years. And last season, each team won on the road, and the Vikings won on the road earlier this year in week 4. So does that spell a road win for the Packers? I certainly hope so.
And Jeff, from a betting perspective, this is effectively a pick'em game. Right now, you're finding Minnesota -1 on this. So even the odds makers are saying this game is going to be tight. It's going to be good. And again, it's going to cost you a little bit to get into this game, even if you probably want some action on it as well.
I'm not too much a believer of, they've been 50-50 for the last 5 years, and they're going to therefore be 50-50 this year. What I do believe, however, is that our defense is better than their defense. Again, going back to DVOA, we're third, they're 14th on the season DVOA. Yards per game, we're 7th, they are 15th. Passing yards per game, we are 8th, they are 30th in the NFL in passing yards per game. The one big statistic in their favor, they are second in the NFL in rushing yards allowed per game on defense. Both teams really good at turnovers. The Packers and Vikings third and second, respectively, in turnovers. So certainly there is some ball hawking on both sides of the ball, but I think that the numbers in general favor us, and let's hope that the players come through and make those numbers a reality on Sunday.
At the start of this season, there were not high expectations for the Minnesota Vikings. We joked a few times already that we only expected them to get 4, maybe 5 wins this season. When we did our preseason prediction of this year, all 3 of us pegged this game as a victory. We just expected this Vikings team to be in a shambles by this point of the season. They are not. They're playing much better than anybody expected, even in their wildest dreams. So the question to you guys is, are you still predicting a Packer victory on Sunday?
Hell yes, I'm predicting a Packer victory this Sunday, John. This is after having 4 straight national games. Now we've got another national game coming up. This is huge. Can the Packers win the division? No, we cannot. They are headed to the playoffs for the 37th time, breaking the tie with the Cowboys for the most all time. They're on the road. They're inside. I think it's going to be a track meet, but I think whatever defense steps up, Neil, DVOA, our defense is looking pretty good. Are they going to pitch a shutout? Probably not. But you know what? These are 2 really, really good teams. They really want and need this game. So, John, I don't think we're going to see vanilla here. I think we're probably going to see some very interesting plays. Now, this year, as in 2 years ago, the Vikings have played extremely well, and some might say have gotten very lucky in one-score, really close games. I don't know if it's going to come down to that, and if it does, the Packers have fared very well in close games this year as well. They only lost by 2 points in week 4 to the Vikings at home. I don't care if they win by 1, by 10, by 20, doesn't matter. As long as Green Bay can come to Minnesota, get a win on the road, that's what we're looking for, and hit the playoffs. Well, get the Bears in there too, but hit the playoffs on a really high note, on a winning streak, national games, a statement game against a rival, a division rival, a neighbor. So friends and neighbors pitted against one another this week. I'm looking forward to the Packers taking care of their business in Minnesota with a win. Go Pack, go.
I gave you all the numbers that explain why the Packers are a team that on the season has been better on offense and on defense, and yes, on special teams. We only lost by 2 to Minnesota earlier this year. Oh, and by the way, that was Jordan Love's first game back from an MCL injury. We know he played very conservatively. He played very tentatively in that game against the Vikings. A Jordan Love at full health is not going to lose that early game. There are 2 other X factors, though, that are in this game. The first is I think the Packers are tired of hearing that they can't beat the very best teams. They've lost to the Eagles. They've lost to the Lions twice. They've lost to the Vikings. I don't think they want to hear going into the playoffs that they've lost to all of the really good teams. I think they've got a chip on their shoulder as far as winning this game because they want to demonstrate that they can beat the best teams in the NFC and put themselves in line for run. The other element of this game that's an X factor is that by snap weighted age, the Packers are the youngest team in the NFL at 25.6 years. The Vikings are the oldest team in the NFL at 27.8 years, a 2.2 year difference. I think that youth is going to serve this team well. I think they're going to take advantage of some of the aging players on that Viking team. That experience works to a certain level, but youth and speed works even better. I think this is going to be a Packers victory. Go Pack, go.
I think that this game not only will have a playoff feel to it, but I think it's going to set the tone for the postseason. I think that Green Bay is looking to, like I said earlier, get this defense rolling and continue to put points on the board. And if they can do so, Neil, as you said, against a strong team in the Minnesota Vikings and get over that hump of beating somebody, that's what's going to happen, and it's going to propel them through the playoffs. If they come in Sunday and they shit the bed, I think that's going to affect them the rest of the time, even though they might have a nice recovery game against the Chicago Bears in Week 18. I think it's going to set that tone for the playoffs. So I am looking for a Packer victory, a statement victory on Sunday in Minnesota. One other thing to note today, December 26th, you guys, is a special anniversary in Packer history. It is the 31st anniversary of Leroy Butler's Lambeau Leap. It was December 26, 1993. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That is all one word, Green Bay Chat. We are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Blue Sky, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. On Facebook, it's the GBC podcast Green Bay Chat. You can follow us on any and all of those social media platforms. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.